All right, what's up, y'all? Welcome back. So let's watch 7 tasteless WWE wrestling characters that should never existed. Let's watch.
Brother.
Oh
Some wrestling gimmicks are really bad, like really bad, like wrestling dentist bad, like
Damn.
wrestling IRS agent bad, wrestling garbage man bad. Like seriously, why do you have another job along with your wrestling job? Doesn't wrestling pay like really well? I mean, they make toys of you. So yeah,
wow.
they're bad, but
That's
they're not
funny.
like offensively bad. But what we're talking about today,
I think that would be like a
yeah.
cool, taking the garbage out. I don't know. I don't know that wrestler. I'm not familiar with all wrestlers, but I think that would kind of be like a cool character. You have some cool lines, you know what I'm saying? Little finishers, taking the garbage out, uh, this guy is trash, like little catchphrases, I think that would work.
I'm Senior Siete for 7 Wrestling. Let's take a look at the 7 most tasteless WWE and wrestling gimmicks of all time.
It has to
Now,
stick. It has to make
before we get
sense.
into this, we appreciate your support. So if you enjoy this video, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and Kona crush that notification bell. Number 1, Mike Awesome. Oh, wow, we're not even going to wait, are we? We're going to get right into it. Okay. Mike Awesome should have been a wrestling promoter's dream come true. He was tall, he was agile, he was in fantastic shape. Honestly, outside of that mullet, the dude is can't miss. And while he did get some heat for jumping to WCW while he was the current ECW champion, there was nothing legally stopping him from doing so. He wasn't under ECW contract at the time, and apparently, not unlike a lot of ECW wrestlers, he was owed quite a bit of money, to the tune of around 50 grand. Yikes. But Mike's problem was going to be similar to a lot of WCW wrestlers' problems in the early 2000s, that being Vince Russo didn't think he was entertaining enough. This guy, not entertaining. So they started by having him chuck Canyon off at the top of a giant cage and calling himself the career killer. Okay, that's not bad. From there, he would develop a fetish for overweight women and change his name to the Fat Chick Thriller. Well, there's our list. Did we forget any other? No, I'm kidding. Really, could you blame me for ending this episode right there? The announcers, Mark Madden in particular, would have a...
I mean, there's some dudes out there that like them big. That's relatable, right? BBW chaser, big and thick lover. I don't know, I guess.
Field day with the fat jokes, saying not to worry, the ring had been reinforced, claiming Mike Awesome is the Mac Daddy for all the big old fatties. Fortunately, this didn't last long as Awesome was transitioned into the winning gimmick of that 70s guy. Much better, right? Number 2, Katie Lee Burchill. Before we get to Katie, here's a quick note about Beaver Cleavage. I feel like we've talked about him a lot, honestly way too much, so we're gonna omit him from this list. If you're unfamiliar, former headbanger, repackaged as an adolescent 50s child star who had inappropriate thoughts about his mother. Unfortunately, this wouldn't be Vince McMahon's first attempt at a character that keeps it in the family, a character whose family tree is a wreath. There was a time he tried to have Ken Shamrock pair up with his storyline sister Ryan Shamrock. There was the time he wanted to be revealed as the father of his real-life daughter Stephanie's child, and when Stephanie rejected the idea, he was like, well, what about your brother Shane? So gross. But Vince finally got his wish with Paul and Katie Lee Burchill. The duo would debut in June of 2006 on an episode of Monday Night Raw, and they simply couldn't stop touching each other, holding hands, stroking abs. And quick aside, Katie Lee is quite an innovator. I think she's the first diva to ever enter the ring butt first. Anyhow, things would get worse as they'd cut a promo, with Katie referring to her brother as beautiful. Paul would follow up by saying every brother loves to make his little sister happy, so whatever Katie wants, Katie gets. It certainly was not subtle or entertaining. Are we supposed to hate them? At any rate, they'd eventually tone down the act and wouldn't rise above the undercard, so they were pretty easy to ignore. Number 3, the Mexicools. I'm sorry, Juventud Guerrera, Psychosis, and Super Crazy are coming into the WWE Cruiserweight division as a unit? Sign me up. This trio is made up of some of the most talented luchadors of all time. Color me giddy. And then when they showed up, they were, let me check my notes. They were riding lawnmowers. Oh boy. Not only that, but the lawnmowers had stickers over the John Deere logos that said Juan Deere. Juan Deere. But what was interesting about the Mexicools is it started off with them using the coveralls and the lawnmowers as a way to poke fun at Mexican stereotypes.
Oh my God.
During their debut promo, Juventud would call out the fans for thinking less of Mexicans, saying that they weren't there to clean their toilets, they were there to take over, which is certainly a motivation, leaning into the stereotypes.
They played into it, so I can't feel too bad.
Power away.
Oh, well.
Problem is, these are ongoing characters and they're not going to get to cut that promo every week. How many people tuned in and just saw these guys riding to the ring on lawnmowers? On the Talk is Jericho podcast, Juventud would admit that he never liked the gimmick. He'd go on to say, I wanted to give the Mexican people a little bit of respect because they already knew about the Mexican gardeners and all of that. And I think for me, that was already corny. It's like, no, let's try to give something different for the audience. The name is super cool. Why don't we go for that? Be cool. The t-shirt was also a lawnmower. I didn't like that. What's even more confusing is the fact that Rey Mysterio had probably moved a ton of merchandise for them over the years. Why wouldn't you try to replicate that feat with masked stars like Psychosis and Juventud Guerrera? If Rey can put his mask back on, why can't they? Anyhow, the Mexicools enjoyed some success, with Juventud winning the WWE Cruiserweight title from Nunzio at No Mercy 2005. Oh, speaking of stereotypes, they'd trade the belt back and forth a few times, nothing to write home about, with Juventud eventually being released in January of 2006. Psychosis and Super Crazy would continue to team through the summer, but they'd eventually break up as well. And on the other end of the Mexicool spectrum, we have number 4, Kerwin White.
That's crazy.
So the Mexicools were a team of men who leaned into the stereotypes of their culture as a way to take ownership of them. And Kerwin White, this was Chavo Guerrero going the opposite direction and denouncing his Mexican heritage. And he did not half-ass this, driving to the ring in a golf cart with his blonde hair, khaki pants, polo shirt, sweater around his neck, and then of course this dance. All right, the dance is kind of funny, but oh boy, when he picked up the microphone, he'd talk about being cut from the same cloth as real Americans. He'd say Chavo was long gone, probably trying to
It's one of the Mexicans that voted for Trump.
get a job at a taco stand like all of the rest of the Hispanics, and that he was the, he was the great white hope. And he'd put a cherry on top of this poop sundae by hitting his catchphrase, if it's not white, it's not right. And believe it or not, it actually gets worse from there. He'd say things like, Shelton Benjamin is one of the best athletes I've ever seen, but Shelton Benjamin is not one of us, and he never ever will be. And why? Because Shelton Benjamin is not white. Yeah, you know, I know how heel heat works. Bad guy says mean things, and then we boo them, but come on. And while the idea did come from Vince McMahon, Chavo would describe how far he was willing to take it in an interview with Chris Van Vliet, saying, I had a meeting with Vince and said, if we're going to do this, let's do it right. I'm supposed to be a brown guy playing a white guy saying this is how you white guys are. They would say no. The Hispanics hated me because I was denouncing my Mexican heritage, and the whites because I was making fun of them. They would say this is not how we dress, and I'm like, oh yes you do. I told Vince at the end of the day, I want to come out in a white sheet. He was like, oh yes, I love it. Now, we never ended up doing that. It got too risque and a little too racist for a network. I wanted to, absolutely. I grew up in a time of wrestling where the more heat, the better.
One of my viewers named TJ, don't you work at a country club? Is this how they be dressing? Let me know in the comments. Your country club got like a little golf course. They dress like all corny, like Carlton Banks with the what's that, like the polo and then the little sweater tied up around the neck with the little khakis or the little plaid shorts. Let me know in the comments. Y'all do be dressing like that. Stop playing.
I wanted to fight my way back to the dressing room every night. I wanted to have to sneak out the back window. I wanted to be in the streets and people.
Sometimes they do it to be funny, because, you know, it's just like to be funny. And some actually do dress like that for real.
Yell, we hate you because that's heat. If I was going to do it, I was going to do it 100%. Like, I'd do anything. We never got to that point, but I was ready.
Maybe not all.
I would have. Fortunately, this mess didn't last very long, and the most notable thing to come out of it was the introduction of Kerwin's caddy, a fella by the name of Nick Nemeth. You might know him better today as Dolph Ziggler. Actually, wait, I take that back. He's actually in TNA now under the name Nick Nemeth. You still probably know him better as Dolph Ziggler. At any rate, Chavo's uncle Eddie would tragically pass away in the fall of 2005, and this helped encourage Chavo to go back to his original ring name. Thankfully. Number 5.
Wow,
Oklahoma.
that whole time I did not know that's what he was doing.
A character named after a beloved musical? What could possibly be wrong with that? I'm sorry, got my notes screwed up. This was actually a character that made fun of a man with Bell's palsy. Okay, I see it now. This train wreck of a gimmick actually first made it to the big time during a Tiger Ali Singh segment where he'd rip off Ted DiBiase's shtick and pay fans to perform embarrassing acts. This time the fan was a plant, WWE writer Ed Ferrara, and was encouraged to do an impersonation of Jim Ross. He proceeded to mimic good old JR with a half-frozen facial expression, a result of his bout with Bell's palsy. This would be broken up by Jim Ross's good friend Dr. Death Steve Williams, who would proceed to give Ferrara one of the scariest German suplexes you're ever gonna see. Sadly, this wouldn't be the last we'd see of Ferrara's Jim Ross impression. When Ferrara joined his writing pal Vince Russo,
it looked like he landed on his neck.
Proceed to give Ferrara one of the scariest German suplexes you're ever gonna see. Sadly, this wouldn't be the last we'd see of Ferrara's Jim Ross impression. When Ferrara joined his writing pal Vince Russo in WCW, they would debut a character named Oklahoma. Oklahoma, clearly named for Jim Ross's love of the Oklahoma Sooner football team, would assault people with barbecue sauce and once again mimic Ross's frozen appearance. And as a bit more salt in the wound, they'd bring in Steve Williams for Oklahoma to manage. You'll generally hear that there's good heat and bad heat in wrestling. Good heat is, ooh, I hate that guy. I want to see him get beat up. And bad heat is, I hate that the company is making me watch this crap. I'm going to change the channel. Oklahoma was definitely bad heat, and it didn't get much better when he actually won the WCW Cruiserweight title. The same cruiserweight title held by legends like Dean Malenko, Rey Mysterio, Eddie Guerrero, Chris Jericho. He would quickly forfeit the title because he didn't meet the weight requirement. Then why was he allowed to compete for it? I hate Russo's WCW so much. Number 6, Jillian Hall.
That has to be the funniest one.
Some of the best wrestling gimmicks were inspired by the silver screen. Sting's iconic look was clearly a nod to Brandon Lee's The Crow. Razor Ramon stole catchphrases Full Sail from Scarface. Say hello to the bad guy. Kane borrowed his trademark head tilt from Halloween slasher Michael Myers. And of course, there's Austin Powers. No, this isn't a Mike Awesome thing again, although, it easily could be. In the Austin Powers sequel Goldmember, Fred Savage plays a spy who is actually a mole. And of course, he has a very prominent mole on his face. This leads Austin Powers to do everything he can to not look at or mention the mole, but he can't. He accidentally mentions it several times. It is not subtle. So, when the WWE decided to replicate this gimmick, and WWE is also not known for its subtlety, the result was Jillian Hall with a mole that covered up the majority of the left side of her face. Oh my, she seriously looked like conjoined twin lady from South Park. WWE creative fella Bruce Pritchard was weirdly defensive of this gimmick during his Something to Wrestle podcast, saying that it wasn't something to make fun of, it was just something to talk about. I guess, but we weren't talking about this woman and her unfortunately enormous mole. We were talking about WWE creative and how friggin' stupid it was. And in the case of WWE can always make something worse, they did in fact make it worse when they decided to move on from the gimmick, because in order to write her mole off of television, they had the boogeyman approach Jillian during an episode of Piper's Pit and eat the mole off of her face.
Why would they do that? Oh, God.
So gross. Number 7. 7. Oh, wow, WCW
That
did a gimmick
just sent chills all over my body. That is disgusting.
based on our favorite number. We should totally love it.
Oh.
Oh gosh, oh, what is happening? All right. On the October 11th, 1999 episode of Monday Nitro, a vignette was played that featured a little boy sleeping in bed. He's awakened by a voice telling him to look under his bed, look in his closet, and eventually look out the window. There, he'd be greeted by a reject from Dark City who would encourage the youngster to join him and live forever in eternal bliss. This was bad. It was less horror creepy and more guy in a van offering free candy creepy. The character, known as Seven, would make his debut a few weeks later and would magically levitate to the ring. Once he was there, it was confirmed that it was none other than the artist formerly known as Goldust, Dustin Runnels. However, the decision had been made that this wasn't the direction they should go, so the way they talked themselves out of this mess was by having Runnels claim that he had left WWE to get away from bad creative concepts like Goldust and that he was coming home to WCW to be himself. However, WCW creative wanted him to be more interesting, so they cooked up Seven. But no more. No more Goldust. No more looking like Uncle Fester, just good old Dustin Runnels. So why the sudden change of heart? Apparently Turner's standards and practices put the kibosh on this whole mess because the character was giving off child abductor vibes. What? What could have possibly given them that impression? Well, there's our list. Did we forget any other tasteless wrestling gimmicks? If so, please leave them in the comments section below. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button.
This was bad. There was like one that was funny, and then that one, the one with the mole just disgusted me. That's gross. I knew once the boogeyman got involved, I'm like, okay, he's gonna eat it. The man has worms in his mouth. Like, I'm not surprised. But yeah, that's gonna do it for this reaction, you guys. Make sure to leave some likes and comments down below. Let me know what you guys think, and I will see y'all in the next one. Toodles.